Hello again, everyone. This is AJ. Welcome to Art Isn't Easy. So, today we are going to continue our little journey through the 1960s. And what I'm doing is going through every year of a decade of film and talking about what my favorite films were from the respective years of that decade. I started with the 1960s and I did 1960 recently. So, obviously, next up is 1961. Now, this year for film is not one of my favorites. There are obviously some great films on this list, but I don't really have a lot of passion for them in comparison to other films that I've discussed on 1960, or we'll also discuss on a couple of years we have coming up. But I do want to single out two films first that will not be making the list, and I feel like some of you might be surprised that they're not on it, but I will explain why. So the first one that I'm not including on my top 10 will be Blake Edwards' Breakfast at Tiffany's. Now, I can't say that I hate the film. It's a very lovely film. It's a charming film. Sure, it's very different from what Truman Capote wrote for the novella, but like Audrey Hepburn, captivating actress. It's kind of hard to go wrong with her. I think what really hurts me with Breakfast at Tiffany's is the Mickey Rooney character, where they had him in Yellowface as the Japanese neighbor. And it's like, even at the time, people were uncomfortable with it, which says a lot. I just feel like it's something that really taints Breakfast at Tiffany's. Now, something similar, you could argue, is going to be in the next film. I'm probably in the minority on this, but the film that I will not be including on my top 10 was that year's big Oscar sweeper, and that was Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins' film adaptation of West Side Story. So, no, I'm not the biggest fan of West Side Story. Even as a stage show, it's not one of my favorites. The film has its issues, and those are its two leads. Richard Beamer, who is most known these days as being Benjamin Horne on Twin Peaks, he plays Tony. And by golly, what a wooden actor he is in this. Like it's hard to even like get invested in the character. And what's even more interesting is that the film swept the Oscars, was nominated for a ton of Oscars, and they didn't even nominate him or his co-star, Natalie Wood, although Natalie Wood was nominated for a different film, Splendor in the Grass, which Natalie Wood was a great actress, don't get me wrong, but Maria is supposed to be Puerto Rican. Natalie Wood, very much not Puerto Rican. So brown face galore, also couldn't do her own singing, neither could Richard Beamer, so that's awful. So no, West Side Story will not be on this list. But I do want to shed some light on some films that I feel like don't get as much attention anymore. So I decided to start my list at number 10 with a film that came from Italy, the Commedia all'Italiana. Did I say that right? I feel like I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. Films from Italy at that time were often like very sumptuous, like the Fellinis with Eight and a Half, La Dolce Vita. But then you also had the Visconti films like Rocco and His Brothers or Rossellini, the neo-realist movement. But there were a lot of interesting farcical, like satirical comedies, some of them veering towards sexual content and others being more blunt in their content. And that is what we're going to talk about right now at number 10, Dino Risi's A Difficult Life. This one actually deals with fascism during and after World War II, because our lead character is a journalist who had fought within the Mussolini army during World War II. But then when he became a journalist after the war, he began posting a lot of anti-fascist articles in this paper, and it leads to him getting more or less attacked for his beliefs. And and the film does have its funny moments. It's very satirical, but it's also just very chilling, especially in the context of today's American political climate that is making us a joke to the rest of the world. If anyone here is watching this from outside America, I am sorry. Our country is awful. Well, a lot of people are awful. Our president sucks. But A Difficult Life is a film that I've only seen once. I would like to see it again. I think that films like that are very crucial to revisit in times like these. So I do just want to keep that out there as a film that deserves a little more of a second look or just deserves more of a reappraisal because not many people talk about it anymore. But at number nine, we have the penultimate film of one of my all time favorite filmmakers. And it is his penultimate film because he would sadly pass away just 2 years after this. And that is Yasujiro Ozu. So at number nine, we have The End of Summer. Now, I will be talking about his final film. Spoiler alert, 1962 is coming up. I do want to point out that The End of Summer was shot in color, which only a couple of his films were. And it is interesting how Ozu's sensibilities feel more connected to black and white cinema than color. Not that it's a detriment to the film by any means. In fact, the color in this film is probably the best out of any of his color films. So this one is about a family. The patriarch of the family owns a sake factory. But as he begins to age, the rest of his family, like his children, they notice that a lot of the family's funds are like just fading away. They don't know where the money's going. Only for them to discover that the father has been giving money to his mistress. So, once again with Ozu, it is the patriarchy basically destroying everything for the women around him. I mean, and that's the thing about Ozu. He, much like Mikio Naruse as well, they were very good at tackling the stereotypes and the traditional, like archaic methods of Japan that sort of began to crumble more and more as we move away from World War II, especially by the time we get to like the late 60s and 70s when it begins to really become more industrial and technical. Ozu is a filmmaker that like I said, he's one of my favorites. I do want to talk about him a little more in depth with his next film, which I did say will be on 1962's list, since that is his final film. So I do want to reserve a little bit more about that. And I have talked about him a little before, so you kind of have an idea of where I'm going with that. Now, at number eight, we have Alain René's Last Year at Morenabad. Now, this one is bizarre because he was very keen on wanting to make a film that felt like a relic of the silent film era, or even like early talkies of the like early 30s. There is that famous shot of the plaza where the people are standing in the sun, but because of the way the sun was, they painted their shadows. So it creates this weird illusion where there are trees that have no shadows, but the people have shadows. It's just a very dreamy, artsy film. I do want to single out our two lead actors. We have Giorgio Albertazzi and also Delphine Seyrig, who many of you might know as Jeanne Dillman herself. But the two of them play simply the man and the woman. And then there is a second man in the periphery. But what we aren't sure about is this woman married to the man? Or is she actually married to this other man who's observing the two of them having an affair? Hilarity ensues. Actually, no. No hilarity. It's a very trippy film. Now, number seven, Britain was very well known for making these like domestic dramas known as kitchen sink dramas, mostly connected to Harold Pinter. But this one is based on a play by a female, actually, Sheila Delaney, and that is at number seven, Tony Richardson's A Taste of Honey. So this one really broke a lot of barriers in many ways. Sheila Delaney was very keen to have content in her work be aggressive, you could say. She wanted to challenge what could be accepted as art. And this was the time where Britain was still very stuffy and repressed because a lot of that didn't start to blossom until the 60s when Labour took over Parliament. You had the Beatles, the Stones, like the censorship laws were basically just shattered. But Taste of Honey is about a girl named Jo. She's 17, going on 18. And she's sort of naive, like Liesel, but She ends up getting pregnant from a younger black sailor who then gets shipped off to sea. So then she has this baby, but ends up having a gay man help her raise it. So you have like interracial, illegitimate child, gay man, and then also Joe's mother is essentially a slut who takes in gentlemen callers all the time. But not as classy as Amanda Wingfield, who, as we all know, she loved her jonquils. Her callers brought her jonquils. I mean, I like Glass Menagerie. I get it's overdone, but it's a classic for a reason. But we won't go into Tennessee Williams right now. So, yes, A Taste of Honey is not exactly a perfect film, but I do appreciate the films like these that really showed a grittier side of Britain, not the posh side. Sort of like how Northern England, for example, is a lot more blue collar than Southern England when you think of like, oh, the posh British people. Whereas if you were to go up to the north and they have that very, like, I think of like a movie like Kess, where their Yorkshire accents are so thick that I literally had to have subtitles when I watched it. And I usually pride myself on understanding thick British accents because I watched a lot of British entertainment from the time I was a little kid. So as we move on to number 6, I do want to start off by saying, has there ever been a more charismatic actor in Hollywood than Paul Newman? And yes, I know there are some that you could probably name that I would agree with, but Paul Newman was a great actor for starters. But there was something about him that just never seemed to age. And yes, he did age. His hair eventually did go white, but he maintained a certain level of charisma that a lot of actors don't keep as they get older, including his looks. He was always very striking as he got older, too. But this film at number 6 is one that I think captures him at something of a peak, and that is Robert Rawson's The Hustler. The Hustler is, he plays Fast Eddie Nelson, a pool shark. And this would be the film, well, not this film, but the film did eventually get a sequel, The Color of Money, directed by Martin Scorsese, who betrayed a lot of us recently by signing up with that AI company. And it's hard to talk about because I absolutely adore Martin Scorsese. So I'm going to like try to ignore that right now. But Paul Newman did win his overdue Oscar for The Color of Money, and once again, it was not deserving. In fact, they actually gave him an honorary Oscar just the year before that he couldn't be there to accept because he sent in a video from the set of The Color of Money. So, that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to point that out. But The Hustler is a great movie. One, you have Piper Laurie in it, who got a Best Actress nomination, and she's wonderful. But what I love about this little tidbit of info is she decided, I'm going to take a break. And then 15 years later, she is coerced by Brian De Palma to join the cast of Carrie as Carrie White's mother, Margaret, the religious fanatic. And then, right, as simple as that, she gets a Best Supporting Actress nomination after being away for 15 years. I mean, it's pretty. I call it the Lee Grant effect. It's like she was blacklisted, but truly not blacklisted. And she's wonderful in this. I do love the atmosphere of the film. This was at a period when black and white films, I would argue, were getting. I don't want to say it was as severe as when like silent films were bashed against talkies, but I will say that this film really showcases how amazing black and white cinematography could be. The use of like lighting and the shadow, there's a very noir environment to The Hustler that's very appealing. And I feel like the film would have lost a lot being in color. So it's a prime example of why certain films just work better in black and white. The Hustler is definitely one of those. Now, at number 5, we have the highest ranking Hollywood English language film on this list. But at number 5, we have the very stirring Stanley Kramer film, Judgment at Nuremberg. And yes, this is about the Nuremberg trials. So it is based on a true story. They did condense down a lot of what happened to make the film a little more like easier to like understand, not stuff it too much. I do want to single out one thing about this because the Nuremberg trials are very well known. I feel like I don't need to like go into the plot per se, but I do want to talk about Judy Garland. So she plays Irene Hoffman in this, who is based on a real character, and she's someone who basically is trying to give a testimony, but then it turns out she might be helping out the defense, the German defense, instead of the prosecution. And it's very heartbreaking to watch, but I do want to single it out because it's proof once again that Judy Garland was a fantastic actress who could do more than just sing. And it is a shame that she did not get as many opportunities. And I get that's because of her behavior, but also that's Hollywood's fault. Like, I don't need to tell some of you like how Hollywood destroyed that woman's life. And we're currently in the middle of the month of June, which is not only the month that she was born, it's also the month that she died. So, and I'm very passionate about Judy Garland, as a lot of you might know. But I will say that Judy Garland, many people thought she would win for this. But then in an upset, they went with Rita Moreno for West Side Story. But I'm not mad about it because Rita Moreno was far and away the best thing about West Side Story. I mean, the role of Anita is just in general my favorite part of West Side Story. So I can't begrudge Rita Moreno that win because she's a phenomenal performer. So yes, Judgment at Nuremberg, but now we're going to say bye to Hollywood because our top four are all foreign films. Now at number 4, we are returning to the world of Michelangelo Antonioni, and this is part of his early 60s trilogy. We already talked about La Ventura, so now we're going to talk about The Night, or as it's known in Italian, La Notte. So, La Notte is a film that I used to describe as being a masterpiece. For some reason, it spoke to me in a way where I was so eager to talk about it with people because I thought it made me look smarter than I actually was. And in reality, I was a pretentious douche as a teenage film bro. I was. I mean, some of you might even argue that now. But Lenate does struggle a lot because there is an infamous scene in this where we encounter one of our lead characters doing blackface. But it's presented in a way to show how out of touch they are. So, in that regard, it does make sense, but it also just feels very unnecessary, even though it was something that a lot of rich white people did at that time. And it is a little bit bizarre, but the film is about a married couple. One of them is a novelist. He has this book coming out, and they're struggling in their marriage. They go to the hospital to see a friend of theirs that's dying, and it causes us a lot of tension in their relationship. Also, the husband gets seduced by a younger woman while at the hospital, and hilarity ensues. No, most of the time, hilarity does not ensue with these movies, so I guess just take what I say with a grain of salt at this point. So, Lenate is a film that is very beautiful to look at. Now, at number 3, we have another great samurai effort from the king of samurais, Akira Kurosawa, and that is Yojimbo. Yojimbo is also perhaps in some ways his funniest film. There's definitely humor in Yojimbo that's unlike really any of his other films. But I do love the story of how Sergio Leone got sued because he essentially took this story and turned it into what would eventually turn into A Fistful of Dollars, with the Clint Eastwood character, A Man with No Name, which is essentially the unnamed Ronin from these films, which was played by Kurosawa's mainstay, Toshiro Mifune, who is a phenomenal actor. And I will say that Yojimbo, I mean, Kurosawa was just a master. I would even make the case that he might be the most influential filmmaker to have ever lived. A lot of what he did shaped so much of what a lot of other filmmakers would do. Like, he inspired filmmakers in, like, not just America, but England, India. It just, the list goes on and on. He's just simply one of the greatest. I mean, I don't talk about him as much as others, but I do acknowledge what he contributed to the art of film is more or less unsurpassable in terms of the influence. So anything by Kurosawa, I would recommend checking out. Yojimbo, I think, is a film that would be readily accessible to many of you in that regard, even if you don't think you'd like samurai films. However, I would not easily recommend my next one, which is another Japanese film, this one by Masaki Kobayashi, and it is actually the end of a trilogy. So here we have The Human Condition 3, A Soldier's Prayer, coming in at number 2. Okay, so this one, as of the filming of this video, this film is actually currently the number 2 film on the Letterboxd Top 250. Coincidentally enough, another one of Kobayashi's films is currently the number 1 film, and once again, spoiler alert, it will be on the 1962 list. But Human Condition 3, I mean, the first two came out in 1959, so I haven't discussed them yet. All I'll say for right now, because I would eventually like to get to doing the 50s, Human Condition 3 is easily the best of the trilogy. But I also feel like it took a long time for me to grow to appreciate these films, and I think that's the case for a lot of film buffs, because the original DVDs were released like 25 years ago or so. The quality was horrendous. The sound was very grainy. The video was just very fuzzy. It was just hard to get into. But then Criterion stepped in about a decade later and remastered the films. And that was how I eventually rediscovered them and found out that they were truly phenomenal films. But it was just, let's just say that if you want something that's a little lighthearted, maybe don't go for Human Condition 3, because the ending is not for ones who want a nice little fantasy, joyful party to celebrate. Because no, the last moments of this film are pretty bleak. That's all I'm going to say about that. But at number 1, we are going to talk about a film from the man himself, Mr. Ingmar Bergman, Lord Ingmar Bergman, Sir Ingmar. Okay, no, he would hate that I linked him up with the monarchy. But yes, number 1 is Ingmar Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly. So, Bergman, as I've established, is my favorite filmmaker. So it probably is not a shock to many of you that I would give his film number 1. But I'm going to try to talk a little bit about Bergman. I don't want to go into him too much, because I eventually would like to do a more extensive video about his work, especially as I navigate through Criterion's massive Ingmar Bergman's cinema collection, because I would like to talk about a lot of his films, his career trajectory, maybe even do a ranking of his films. Bergman is known for being a very bleak director. The content of his work is usually dark. And even with this film, it's like, oh, he's just dealing with suicide, incest, like theological discussions. It's like nervous breakdowns. It's just light. It's fun for the whole family, especially if there's a lot of dysfunction, because Bergman loves that. And you'll love him, maybe. But Bergman was a director who spoke to me very early on. But what surprises me about that is his films are often very slow and moody, to put it mildly. What I do think is amazing about his work is how a lot of his films aren't even that long. I mean, you have stuff like Scenes from a Marriage or Fanny and Alexander, but those were originally miniseries in Sweden that got cut down to be theatrical features over here. So, of course, they're going to be longer to be substantial, but a lot of his films are roughly an hour and a half long, including Through a Glass Darkly. And I feel like he's able to tell so much in so little time. And it's like he just gets in, does the job, kind of whips you up a little bit, and then he's done. Now, this film does contain an amazing performance by one of his earlier muses, Harriet Andersson, who did a lot of with his films, namely Summer with Monica, where she was Monica. And she does a fantastic job in that, even though the character of Monica is definitely a little insufferable. I don't want to judge her too much, but I do question a lot of her motives, even though I do feel like she deserved to do what she wanted to do with her life, and she was young and made mistakes. But also, Bergman was very problematic in his personal life with women, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that Summer with Monica came out the way it did. But for his early work, definitely good for Bergman levels, because Bergman did have a fascinating start to his career, but I'll go into that another time. But Harriet Andersson in this film probably gives not just her best performance, but one of the best in a Bergman film, and just of that era in general. Just watching her mental anguish as she has this nervous breakdown, as they sit on the island of Faro, which is that little island that Bergman always shot on. It's just, Bergman was always amazing at unease. The dread, the unease, the palpable tension, what he was able to mine out of his films. It was literally like a sponge, and you're literally just squeezing it, and the water's dripping. And I feel like no other filmmaker has ever made me feel that intensely connected to his work, much like Bergman. And it's interesting because I feel like there was that element of pretension when I was younger because I got very into him as a teenager. But I really responded to every aspect. I loved how he worked with his actors because he reused a lot of them. Even in this film alone, Max von Sydow is in it, and he would be in several of them after this. Plus, he was in The Seventh Seal. Eventually, he would use Liv Ullmann all the time, even having an affair with her, or a fling, or relationship, whatever you want to call it. With Bergman, you never know what you're going to call it because Bergman was a man whore. Hopefully, his estate doesn't come after me, but I respect his work. Settle down. As a person, yes, questionable. But Through a Glass Darkly is one of his more underrated efforts. I will say this is part of what's considered a de facto Faith trilogy, which is also followed by Winterlight and The Silence. And these three films represent, I would say, maybe his most underrated period of his career. And I will be, spoiler alert, once again, talking about those other two films as well. But Through a Glass Darkly, I also really have to point out the whole thing about the spider god that wants to rape Harriet Andersson. I mean, when has that not happened to anybody? Spiders raping women. God is a spider. Is very lustful. What a man whore you are. Anywho, so that brings us to the end of the list. So next up, we will be talking about 1962, which is actually often considered one of the greatest years for cinema. Will I agree with that? Possibly. I will say it will be a step up from 1961. So I am excited to talk about that, and I'll hope to get into that pretty soon. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in 62.